Deep in a secluded Tasmanian river, Levi Triffitt just made the greatest gold discovery of his prospecting life. Nuggets packed so tightly into bedrock crevices that he called it a motherlode. Years of frostbite, hypothermia, and solo journeys miles from the nearest road all converged on this single location. And the remarkable part, gold rush miners from the 1800s never made it here. They simply couldn't. The old-timers never laid eyes on this gold. I'm currently camped along a remote stretch of gold-bearing river, untouched by human hands. The gorges were too sheer, the terrain too punishing, so the gold simply sat there, undisturbed, accumulating for a century and a half. Now Levi is the first person in history to work this bedrock. And what he's uncovering is redefining what anyone believed was achievable with a snorkel and a plastic bottle in Tasmania. This is what a genuine gold jackpot looks like. And it keeps growing. When I finally had the chance to get there, I wasn't let down. In fact, I found the richest gold deposit I have ever come across. Who are the Tassie boys? In late 2020, Levi's brother Jackpot Triffitt passed away following a long struggle with his mental health. The two of them had built Tassie boys together, daredevil videos, outdoor stunts, a decade's worth of wild adventures across Tasmania's rugged landscape. Our very first clip we put online received over 1 million views in a single year. People were saying, "Turn it into a film. It's better than, I won't say what, but it's better than this and that." At one point, they made international headlines with a discovery briefly thought to be the remains of a Tasmanian tiger, a find significant enough to be sent to the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery in Launceston for professional identification, drawing attention from around the globe. Jackpot was the co-founder, the closest companion, the other half of everything the channel had ever stood for. That same year, Levi rebranded the channel to Tassie Boys Prospecting and pushed further into the rivers than he ever had before. He has never stopped. "When I'm miles along a river with the pack raft, completely alone," Levi has said, "I carry my brother with me in my mind." The prospecting is more than a livelihood. It is grief made physical, a way of staying connected to someone who is no longer there, of continuing work that was always meant to be done together. Levi has spoken openly about living with depression and anxiety for years, and about what the rivers do for him during the hardest stretches. The same wilderness that nearly cost him his life in his early prospecting days is also the place that keeps him moving forward. He has described the frostbite, the hypothermia, the days that produced almost nothing after weeks of effort. And he has described returning every single time, because the alternative is sitting still with grief that has no other release. For Levi, gold was never purely about money. It was always about motion, about having somewhere to go and something to look for that made the journey worthwhile. That tension is the true foundation of Tassie Boys Prospecting. It's what gives the channel a depth that goes far beyond the gold itself. There's an untouched oasis out there, and I've just packed my equipment miles into this remote, unforgiving, yet beautiful and enchanting world. Tasmania's forgotten gold. Tasmania has been yielding gold for over 170 years. The Beaconsfield mine alone extracted 854,000 ounces over its working life. In 1883, a single nugget recovered from Rocky River weighed more than 243 ounces, the largest ever recorded in the state. The northeastern goldfields around Beaconsfield and Lefroy produced alluvial and reef gold on a scale that made Tasmania a legitimate gold-producing region in the 19th century Pacific. The operators of the 1800s were serious, determined people. But they worked without GPS, without modern hydrology, and without the satellite imagery that allows a 21st century prospector to cross-reference a Victorian-era survey map against current river topography in a single afternoon. More critically, terrain stopped them. The gorges were impassable with 19th century equipment. Reaching the remote drainages required multi-day expeditions. And when easier gold was available closer to camp, nobody pushed deeper into the wilderness to discover what lay beyond the next ridge. They left gaps, specific, identifiable gaps. Terrain types the 1800s operators consistently gave up on. Geological formations they couldn't access. Drainage systems they marked on maps and never returned to. Those gaps didn't vanish when the gold rush ended. The rivers kept flowing. The floods kept carrying gold into crevices. The bedrock kept accumulating whatever the water deposited. And critically, no one ever went back. Tasmania's complicated legal framework around mineral ownership removed the financial motivation that might have drawn prospectors into those hard-to-reach drainages in the century that followed. The inaccessible areas remained inaccessible, and the gold stayed exactly where the river had placed it. Those untouched systems are precisely where Levi operates. We're back in the wild rivers of Tasmania's temperate rainforests on the adventure of a lifetime. I'll be spending 3 days along the banks of a remote river, camped up and searching for gold. My goal for this trip is to return to a super-rich deposit of fine gold for 2 days. Creek beds with zero prospecting pressure since the gold rush era. A century and a half of alluvial gold accumulation, undisturbed, in country the 1800s could never reach. The gap the old miners left behind is the opportunity Levi is actively working right now. And it is larger than anyone outside of Tasmania's prospecting community ever imagined. The science of where gold hides. Gold is 19 times denser than water. When a Tasmanian river floods, and they flood hard, fed by the island's heavy rainfall and steep mountain terrain, everything in the water column gets displaced. Sediment, gravel, organic matter, all of it is stirred up and swept downstream. When the flood energy subsides, the heaviest materials are always the first to settle. Gold is always first. It sinks into fractures in the bedrock. It gathers on the inside bends of river curves, where the water slows and velocity drops. It piles up behind boulders and in any hollow where turbulence loses its force. And it accumulates in layers. One flood deposits gold, the next flood deposits more on top, then another, then another. Over decades, over a century, without anyone disturbing the bedrock, those layers build into what prospectors call a pay streak. A dense, concentrated ribbon of gold locked into the river's lowest energy zones. Tasmania's rivers carve through ancient, hard bedrock, schist, quartzite, dolerite, that traps heavy metals with extraordinary precision. The island's high rainfall keeps the rivers vigorous and constantly reshaping their beds. Most importantly, much of the best bedrock sits in remote gorges that shielded it from 19th-century prospectors. The result is a natural sorting mechanism that has been operating since before the gold rush ended, and nobody has ever switched it off. When Levi dives into a Tasmanian river bend and works the crevices in an exposed section of schist, he isn't hunting for gold at random. He is interpreting the river's physics. He is locating the precise points where the shape of the bedrock and the hydraulics of past flood events have been funneling heavy metals for 150 years. The concentration isn't luck. It is the cumulative product of gravity, water, and time. This mission will be 4 days on the toughest river I've ever attempted, 42 kilometers of steep ravines and gorges, deep valleys, powerful waterfalls, and the best gold discovery I've ever made. Operating on gold-bearing ground that has never been disturbed. A skilled prospector can read a river. An experienced prospector can look at a river bend and predict, before ever entering the water, whether it is likely to hold gold. The inside of the bend is where velocity drops, and that is where the gold stops moving. A large boulder sitting mid-current creates a hydraulic shadow directly behind it, and that is where gold accumulates. A step down in the bedrock forms a natural underwater shelf. Gold falls into that shelf and stays there through every successive flood event. The seasoned sniper reads these features the same way a geologist reads rock strata. The river tells the same story every time it floods, and the bedrock is the record of every chapter. In some of these same river systems, Levi has also documented finding osmiridium, a naturally occurring alloy of osmium and iridium, 2 metals from the platinum group. Osmiridium has historically been valued at several $100s per ounce and was widely used as tip material for fountain pen nibs. It occurs alongside alluvial gold in certain Tasmanian drainages. And finding it is yet another sign that the geology of these river systems concentrates heavy precious metals in ways that remain only partially understood by anyone working in the field. The tools of a modern prospector. Levi's core kit. A snorkel, a mask, a plastic snuffer bottle, a gold pan, and a pack raft. The technique is called sniping, getting into the water, diving to the bedrock, and manually vacuuming accumulated gold out of crevices by hand. No motor, no heavy machinery, no mechanical advantage beyond the suction of a handheld bottle. Sniping requires only a standard prospecting license. For those who don't know what sniping is, it's basically jumping into the river with a snorkel, a mask, and a wetsuit, because in Tasmania the water is freezing cold. You fan away the gravel, clear it off, and underneath on the bedrock is where the gold sits. It leaves almost no environmental footprint. It can be carried out by a single person working alone in near-freezing water inside a remote gorge. And in the right location, it recovers more gold per day than motorized dredges running 100 horsepower engines, because a dredge cannot fit into a crevice the way a human hand and a snuffer bottle can. And because the right location matters infinitely more than the machinery. Working a productive crevice looks straightforward on camera. In practice, it is grueling. You are face down in water that may be just above freezing, pressing a bottle against rock you can barely make out through the silt you've disturbed, working as much by touch as by sight. A single productive crevice might be 20 centimeters long and 3 centimeters wide. The gold has been packing into it across dozens of flood events. Work it correctly, clearing the silt, reaching to the back of the crack, and what emerges can be worth hundreds of dollars from one small patch of bedrock. Then you move to the next crevice. Then the one after that. A productive pay streak transforms a river into a continuous series of those discoveries, one after another. Each one confirming that you're in the right place and that more lies ahead. Location is everything in sniping. Work the wrong creek all day and you go home with trace amounts that barely justify the time spent. Work the right bend in the right creek, on bedrock that has been gathering gold since the 1800s. Miners turned back at the gorge entrance, and the crevices keep producing. The snuffer bottle is the delivery mechanism. The knowledge of where to place it took years to develop. The pack raft is what makes Levi's reach possible at all. It gets him into drainages that are genuinely unreachable by any other means. Down river corridors where hiking out would take multiple days. That distance from the nearest road is not an inconvenience. It is the competitive advantage. The further into the wilderness Levi can push, the greater the probability that the bedrock in front of him has never been touched by another prospector. Distance from civilization in 2025 is what makes a deposit still available. Years of searching, then the motherlode. The early years nearly broke him. Frostbite in winter rivers. Hypothermia severe enough to nearly render him unconscious in the field. Alone, miles from any help. Long days diving on promising-looking bedrock that gave back almost nothing. He has said that during the early period, he was so consumed by the hunt that his own physical safety became secondary. And the consequences were real. Most people would have stopped after the first winter. He didn't. Trip after trip, river after river, season after season. What changed was not luck. It was method. Levi began cross-referencing historical mining records with modern satellite imagery. He identified specifically where the 1800s operators had worked, and more critically where they had stopped and why. As the years have gone by, I've had to travel further and further into remote country to find deposits like this. With the internet and the powerful mapping tools now available, there aren't many places left in hiding. He built a detailed understanding of the terrain types that consistently halted 19th century prospectors, the gorge systems, the impassable river corridors, the drainage networks whose logistics the gold rush era simply couldn't support. He developed a working knowledge of Tasmanian river geology that is genuinely uncommon, the kind that only accumulates from years of being wrong in the field and recalibrating. He learned which bedrock formations trap gold most efficiently. He learned which river bends hold pay dirt and which only look like they might. He learned to identify the geological signals that suggest a pay streak before he ever enters the water. He pushed further than anyone else was prepared to go, packing a raft into remote drainages that required multi-day expeditions just to reach the starting point, spending nights alone in the bush because the creek he needed to check couldn't be done in a single day. Some of those expeditions returned very little. Others returned just enough to confirm that the geology was sound and the location was worth revisiting. That is how a serious prospector operates, not chasing a gut feeling, but systematically ruling out bad locations and building a case for good ones. Levi has described this process in his content. It is not glamorous. It is weeks of effort that produces nothing visible on camera, carried forward by the conviction that the right bedrock exists somewhere ahead in the drainage system, and that reaching it is a matter of persistence and hard work rather than fortune. Then he found it. A pay streak is the concentrated line of gold accumulation threading through a productive section of river. Individual spots within a pay streak look unremarkable until you work the bedrock systematically and realize the gold just keeps appearing. One crevice, then the next, then the one after that. The density increases as you near the center, and suddenly you are looking at an amount of gold that would take weeks to locate in a normal spot. You are no longer prospecting blind. You are working a known source deposit, systematically determining whether it extends further upstream or downstream than you have yet reached. Levi returned to the same location across multiple expeditions. Each time, it kept delivering nuggets stacked into bedrock crevices, dense concentrations across just a handful of square meters. Experienced prospectors working productive Tasmanian rivers have documented individual sessions yielding thousands of dollars worth of gold in a single day. In a pay streak of this scale, compounding over 150 years of undisturbed accumulation in inaccessible gorge country. We're gold snipers and adventurers from the island of Tasmania. We're currently on day 3 of a 5-day adventure, revisiting a gold field that has been cut off from the outside world for over 150 years. The potential of what remains in that bedrock is something most prospectors never encounter across an entire career. A run of 3 videos from this period drew close to 3 million views in 2 months. Audiences around the world recognized exactly what they were watching. Not a lucky day, not a one-off discovery. A motherlode that had been building in inaccessible bedrock since long before Levi Triffitt was born. The law that makes it even stranger. Under a 1995 Tasmanian law, the holder of a standard prospecting license does not gain legal ownership of the minerals they recover. Tasmania's Director of Mines confirmed this in writing. A prospecting license grants no right to a mineral. Every nugget Levi pulls from that bedrock with a plastic bottle legally belongs to the Crown. Tasmania is the only Australian state with this law. In every other state on the mainland, in Victoria, in Western Australia, in Queensland, you find it, it's yours. In Tasmania, you find it on behalf of the government. And the government has no obligation to compensate you for the effort it took to get there. Levi has addressed this directly in his content, putting it in his own words. Years of grueling effort, hundreds of days in the field, all of it technically carried out on behalf of the Crown. The legal reality is that blunt. Hundreds of days in freezing water, frostbite, hypothermia, multi-day solo expeditions deep into remote wilderness, and the ownership of whatever comes out of the bedrock belongs to the government. By the end of day 2, I had secured the largest pan of gold nuggets I have ever found in 7 years of doing this. He has even given this situation a label in his content, describing it as one of the most absurd realities of prospecting in Tasmania. The law is nearly impossible to enforce in practice. Alluvial gold carries no origin markers, no Tasmanian stamp, no chain of custody connecting a nugget to a specific river. The practical reality is that Tasmanian prospectors continue working, and the law continues sitting in the background as a peculiarity that the rest of Australia finds baffling. But enforceability isn't really the point. The point is that Levi keeps going back regardless. He dives into water that nearly killed him in his early years, in country the 1800s miners abandoned as impassable, pulling gold that legally belongs to the government, because the river gives him something the gold cannot replace. He carries his brother in his mind out there. The river is the one place that still connects him to Jerem. No law changes what it costs him to reach those rivers, or what they give him when he arrives. What is waiting in the bedrock right now? Levi Triffitt is loading a pack raft on the bank of a Tasmanian river, miles from the nearest road. Cold water, hard schist bedrock, a plastic snuffer bottle, and a snorkel. The grief he carries goes with him on every dive, just as it has since 2020. He is not doing this for the money. Legally, the money doesn't even belong to him. He is doing it because the river is the only place remaining where he and Jerem are still part of the same story. The pay streak he has been working may extend further upstream than anything he has reached so far. Tasmanian rivers don't run straight. They wind through gorges, step down over rock shelves, carve through formations of schist and quartzite that have been building gold traps since long before any Europeans set foot on the island. First, I had to carry my heavy equipment miles into position, hiking through steep, off-track scrub, climbing through miles of wild gorge, log jams, and deep pools to reach the area that had been left in hiding. The section Levi has documented is only one part of a drainage system that runs deep into country he hasn't fully mapped yet. The physics that placed gold in the crevices he has already worked is the same physics acting on every crevice upstream. The floods that built the deposit he found did not stop at the last bend he reached. The gorges ahead grow deeper. The drainages grow more remote and less charted. Somewhere in the bedrock beyond the furthest point Levi has reached, in crevices no prospector has ever cleared, 150 years of floods have been stacking gold that no one has touched. The 1800s operators turned back before they ever arrived. The terrain stopped them cold. The terrain stopped them. The floods kept running. The physics kept sorting. The gold kept building, while the rest of the world moved on and forgot this country existed. Levi Triffitt never got to see what his brother found in those rivers. But the channel they built together is still alive. The discoveries are still coming. Every expedition Levi makes deeper into the Tasmanian wilderness is one more answer to a question the two of them started asking together a long time ago, in a place where most people would never think to look. If this pay streak is as extensive as the evidence suggests, what unfolds on the next expedition is the chapter of this story that has not yet been written. The bedrock is still down there. The crevices are still full. And Levi is still going back. Subscribe to Tassie Boys Prospecting on YouTube and hit the bell. You do not want to miss what comes out of that bedrock next. And drop a comment below, would you go back to that river, knowing everything Levi knows, knowing what the law says about who owns what comes out of it, and make the next dive? Because Levi already has his answer. He always does.